Good day, Tennessee Vol fans. This is the VolPod, the first edition of the VolPod. So VolPod number one. I'm the lone Vol under the guise of anonymity. And you know what? We had a football game not too long ago. It's Thursday. Normally this podcast would be on a Monday, but who cares? It's the first one. Secondly, look for a preview podcast on the Pittsburgh game coming up September 10th. That'll probably drop on Thursday or Friday. Usually I'd like to get two out a week, along with any sort of articles and whatnot. You can figure out where to find those at the end of this podcast. So, initial impressions of the Ball State game. Good performance, I want to say. Yeah, that was a good performance by Tennessee. I thought everybody was a little rusty at first. Like Hendon Hooker looked like he hadn't played a game in 9 months because he hadn't. When I watched this initially, I thought the first and second drive, well, really the second drive, I was like, what is going on? But after a rewatch, they didn't start out as bad as I thought. I don't believe any position area sort of regressed, and I'd say all but one or two areas actually leveled up. But sort of the same as last year, I didn't really see a true game breaker, either on the offensive side of the ball or defensive side of the ball. I don't know if that will come, but like where does the rushing production come from? You know, at wide receiver, I think we're probably a little better. Definitely a little better than I thought we'd be. Having Brew McCoy certainly helps. Tillman, I thought he looked great. But where we desperately need one at running back, I don't think we have that true game breaker, type of player. Otherwise, I thought we played pretty disciplined. A lot of good tackling in space, not a ton of missed tackles. The game plan was just, really vanilla, and I think that made the mentality seem just sort of vanilla. I would like to see guys out there really flying around, hurting people. But I don't want to say it was bad. It was just more businesslike, with a shade of swagger. You got guys out there signing shoes and whatnot, flopping for penalties. I love these things, sort of the game within a game, and it shows that this team has developed quite a bit of experience. And realistically, that's if there's one main takeaway from this game, it's that the main improvement, which is something I don't think it's just going to jump off the TV screen at you, was just the idea of experience. The understanding that the points will come. We just have to, keep doing what we're doing. I think you could see it at the beginning of the Florida game last year. There was almost this aura of trying to play keep up with Florida. And in hindsight, Florida wasn't that great last year. It was almost like everybody in the stadium knew as soon as we made a mistake, the wheels were going to fall off. And that's exactly what happened last year in that Florida game. And, you can say whatever you want to about, this is sort of a ho-hum performance. I mean, it's 59 points. That's not too bad. I don't think Ball State is great, but I don't think that they are, Akron, which we get to play later on in the year. But, yeah, just an almost business-like demeanor to the team with a hint of swagger, I would say, just a hint. But people forget, in the season opener last year against Bowling Green, it was a 14-6 game at halftime. I didn't believe that either, but you could go look it up. 14-6. And then you remember, Joe Milton was starting, and you're like, it's a completely different team with him under center. So, but all right. So on offense, pluses. One, the pace is still there. It's really good to see. They could actually dictate that tempo a little bit. You could tell as the game went on when they sort of slowed things down a touch, and things actually moved okay. There's a lot to be said about rhythm, and especially on this team. Again, like I said, I don't think anything is really, no position group regressed. I thought Hendon Hooker looked the same, maybe slightly a bit better just in terms of his command of the offense. I thought Joe Milton looked a lot better, head and shoulders better. I'll get to him in a minute. In terms of overall flow, I mean, 39% on third down, that's not fantastic, but we sort of converted the fourth downs with a little gifts from the refs. Like on occasion, like there was a phantom PI call on a couple of occasions that extended drives. One was on a fourth down in the red zone where I don't think Princeton Font is catching that ball if he were like escorted by the Secret Service. But yeah, nothing really subtracted. Again, I thought the receivers were, I don't want to say surprisingly good, like you knew there was some semblance of talent there, but again, not necessarily a game breaker. I will say I wasn't particularly impressed with the running back position. It's like the only position that didn't seem to level up quite as much. I would say it was, I mean, last year you had Tylen Evans for like half a season. I don't think there's a Tylen Evans back on the roster as of yet. It's not, and again, it's not like we have bad players there, but when your quarterback is simply, I hate to say this, but he's an above average runner. I wouldn't qualify him as, some spectacular running threat. He can definitely get yards on his feet, Hendon Hooker. Um, but if you have an above average runner at quarterback and you rely so much on the running game, it would be nice to have a really dynamic playmaker back there, or at least some sort of Percy Harvin or one of the South Carolina wide receivers that they always seem to have, or at least they did in like the past 5 years. Just getting explosive yards from different people and different places on the field would really make this offense unstoppable. Um, we also don't use the running backs a ton in the passing game, and I thought that Dylan Sampson had a pretty good reception there. I think he had the one catch for like 19 yards or something. Um, because the fact is like when your offense revolves around one dude, the game sort of becomes 11 on 1. That's the trouble I think that Florida's going to have this year. And where Billy Napier, I always want to call him Billy Donovan, but that was the basketball dude. Billy Donovan has this, I would say, tremendous talent at quarterback, and it's your first year, and you're like, well, I could just get this guy to do everything, and the rest of the team is going to suffer. But whereas Dan Mullen, like how stupid is Dan Mullen, by the way? You had Anthony Richardson on the bench. If Anthony Richardson is playing, you probably aren't fired. And it's very strange, too, because Dan Mullen is notorious for putting way too much on his quarterbacks, right? And then when his quarterbacks get stopped, it's like, well, he just sort of runs out of ideas. Like, well, this guy can't do anything anymore. What else am I supposed to do? But to continue on the Florida theme, the best example is Tim Tebow's best year statistically in 2007. That's the year he won the Heisman. He had outrageous numbers. But the team went 8-4 and lost to that Michigan team that lost to Appalachian State, like in the bowl game. But if you look at the bookended seasons, in 2006 they win a title. Tim Tebow's not the focal point. And 2008 they win the title, and they've got Percy Harvin. Long story short, you put a lot on your quarterback. It's never a good idea, unless he's Cam Newton. Then you're in pretty good shape. But anyway, like I said, this is not a Florida podcast. I would have liked, this is a nitpicky thing, but I would have liked to have seen less reliance on Hooker's legs, sort of in the red zone. Okay, so both Hooker running touchdowns came on 2nd and goal. And I'm glad we got them. Not a big deal. It just seems like that may be a go-to sort of thing. I would have liked to save that for Pitt. Maybe I'm sure they'll run like a different look there. Really sort of catch people off guard. So maybe there's more to it, but I just don't like the reminder, right? Like, oh yeah, Hooker can run. He can run for 2 touchdowns, like in the red zone. In the red zone, in general, we're not great, so maybe kind of pocketing that and testing something else out would have been fine, but that's mostly hindsight. As far as running backs, they said Jabari Small gained like 12 or 15 pounds or something in the off season. Maybe he only needed to gain like 5, maybe 10 or something. He should be good for getting yards like on occasion, which is something we really haven't had in the last couple of years. He had a couple of good runs, but I mean, there's just not the incredible explosion he had, like even in his freshman year. I find that like a lot of running backs aren't great but run really hard with sort of like this reckless abandon. And I really feel like the younger you are at that position, probably the most raw talent you have. But it comes at the cost of not being bulked up. Coaches always want to bulk these guys up, but at the same time play 4 or 5 running backs. Like, what's wrong with, okay, you've got your big guy, you've got your little guy, you've got a guy that's pretty good between the tackles, you've got a guy that can run outside. If you want to play 4 running backs, like, do they all have to have the same build? I don't really get that, but it comes at the cost of not really being like bulked up or I guess roided out if you play for maybe other teams. But I see this with Jabari Small, and it's a lot of the running backs that have come through here. You hear a lot about this idea of, okay, well, you got to wait for the play to develop. In a zone, you're just waiting for the dive, the bounce outside, or you cut it back. You're waiting to see the hole. But I find a lot of these guys, they'll wait, they'll see something, and by the time they notice something, the hole is closed. So there's a reactionary period there where you go, oh, okay, it's closed. You know, it's really more about anticipating where the opening is going to be, right? That's what when people say vision, a lot of these guys are seeing openings, but the window is closed. It's more about sort of anticipating where the opening is going to be, and the way you do that a lot of times is just reading what the linebackers are doing, because that should tell you where the flow of the play is going. If the linebackers are charging really hard, chances are you can cut it back the other way. It's almost getting like tunnel vision, not really worrying about what defensive linemen and offensive linemen are doing, but just reading the flow of the play and understanding where it's going to happen other than seeing what's right in front of you. It's really difficult to do, and the shit goes real quick. You know what I mean? So unless you have like these really grand offensive lines that sort of open up like gigantic holes, then who cares? But we don't have that. Sorry to say. At some point, Joe Milton comes in the game. Not a moment too soon. I really liked what I saw with Milton, I gotta say. And no, he's not a better quarterback than Hendon Hooker at this moment. As of September 6th, 2022, he's not a better quarterback than Hendon Hooker. That's not what I'm saying. But there are clearly a few things you saw him do in the time that he was on the field that Hendon Hooker could not. And the fact is like the fact that he was yanked so quickly sort of tells you, his standing on the team. If he just played out the rest of the second half, you would think that the coaches were like, okay, he's not really, we got a solid backup here. No, he's a special guy. He is a special talent. And there are a few things you saw him do in the time that he was there that Hendon Hooker just can't, right? And again, not saying he's a better quarterback, but he's, I would say, definitely more athletic. Like, so there's a question of touch, right? I don't know if this guy can throw slow. Milton may not be able to throw slow. Everything's a rope. There are no arches. They're all lasers. You could probably call them teleportations, even. But God, it's so pretty. It's just so fun to watch because there's no wind-up. It's like, look at the flick of the wrist. It's that. You know what I mean? And so you can see in this game what the coaching staff saw a year ago in his lead-up to being the starter. 2 plays come to mind. So the first play is this little scramble he had. Drops back. He looks downfield. Dude's not open. Looks at the second option. Realizes he's under pressure. And scrambles incredibly easy on the other side of the field for a first down. I think it was at least 10 yards. It may have been like 15 or something. Last year, I think he would have either forced something in, hesitated a bit too long. He's just a better, pure runner of the football than Hendon Hooker. He's a big body. He's faster. He's more fluid. And I've often wondered, like, why the staff didn't just say, hey, look, if the first guy's not open, just run. If you got space, just run. No big deal. We'll take that every day. That's essentially what Matt Corral did. In Ole Miss, he would look and say, well, I've got openings. And he just ran past guys. Get the field spread out. You're a one-on-one matchup with a really sloppy guy in front of you. Just run if you got space. So I wonder what the deal was. Like, was it a bad habit in Michigan, or Jim Harbaugh's like, hey, look, we throw the ball here. please don't, please don't use those legs. No, I don't care how athletic you are. I heard you did backflips on some commentary, but um, we don't do that here at Michigan. Um, or maybe he just doesn't like getting hit. That could be another thing. Guys with big bodies, they may not like getting hit either. But so the second play was just a little like wide receiver screen, far side of the field, but the ball instantly gets to the receiver's hands. All right, even on the poor commentary, we'll go over that in a minute. It just appears. It's insane. But with his arm, he can make these throws all over the field. And when you have an offense that is predicated on space, sometimes you look and say, okay, well, where's the matchup? Where are the favorable matchups in this offense? I think this wide receiver can beat that cornerback with ease, so forth and so on. But when you add space to the equation, those matchups start to get a little more dynamic. But yeah, those two things I don't think Hendon Hooker can do. The problem is he does everything else like more consistently, um, and that's why he's your quarterback. But who has a better passing percentage thus far this year? Joe Milton. Higher yards per attempt as well, 12.6. That's hard to beat that. I don't know if he's reached like Jalen Hurts backup status yet, but he's very good. That was a big question for me going in this season. If Hendon Hooker did fall out, God forbid, would Joe Milton pick up the slack? I think this year, yeah. And I think it's without sacrificing too much about the offense. It may even enhance it. And if it does, then he should have been playing all along. But you heard it here last. And I'll say one more thing. That first pass to the tight end in the red zone for the would-be touchdown, tight end should have had that. No doubt in my mind. I don't know what the hell these guys were talking about. He turned around. The ball was there. It hit his hands. Yeah, did it have some heat on it? Of course. But come on. You're a big guy. You can catch that. So, yeah. Offense looked pretty good. Defense. Let's see. A lot of talk about the back end of this defense being sort of shot. And I agree it probably doesn't have again, common theme, doesn't have the requisite playmaker. But they do seem to have leveled up a bit. Like they all have good body types. All seem pretty athletic. But particularly Warren Burrell, he just sort of got lost in coverage. But I will say, I thought Warren Burrell was lined up mostly in the right spot. Usually some pretty good routes being ran by his guy. Got lost in coverage just a little bit. I thought we covered screens really well, and that's just sort of a theme. When a team is overmatched, you play these overmatched teams, tend to get a lot of this. And I thought, we defended it very well, which means we were incredibly prepared. Preparation, half the battle. I thought we tackled in space incredibly well. I thought the linebackers filled gaps extremely quickly. A little bit out of position sometimes, but you can sort of get away with that when you're playing Ball State. If you're playing a different team, it doesn't pay to be out of position because Ball State didn't do anything super crazy. I know they had the flea flicker and all that, but the guys were pretty disciplined. And Ball State's first like a real drive, the first time they throw, it's an interception. But that's a lot of how this goes when you're playing an overmatched opponent where they'll gash you, but because you just don't give a shit. You know what I mean? You're like, well, we're playing Ball State. So, but when the nuts are on the line, like on that fourth down stop, very early on in the game, I think they tried a quarterback sneak. They caught us off guard a little bit, took a good timeout. But you could tell, like, some of these drives that Ball State were put together, 11, like that. I think that first drive was like 12 plays or something. And that's always in that territory where eventually the math is going to catch up with you. If you got 12 plays, how many different combinations can you work with? Because you at this point you've probably only scripted like 15 of these plays, and you can tell right off the bat like five aren't going to work, right? So at some point it's like, well, where do we have a matchup advantage? Oh, nowhere, because we're playing Tennessee. Well then, what do we do? Nothing, because the drive stalls. The longer the offense is on the field, the more the defense can get into a rhythm, start feeling out tendencies, et cetera, et cetera. If you look at our drives, something like 8 is the magic number. We get in, try to get out real quick. It's very difficult for a defense to get any sort of feeling. And if you add our tempo to that, that's why our offense is so good. But anyway, this is about the defense. There was a lot of chatter online about a lack of a pass rush, so the front end of the defense. And even like the bad commentators seem to get the heebie-jeebies from this. Like, yeah, no kidding. 0 sacks, not great. And I'm not here to blow smoke or anything like that, but the Ball State quarterback I thought was pretty good at getting the ball out of his hands. There were actually, I would say, a good amount of pressures. It goes back to this theory of long drives, right? So if you're getting the ball out of your hands in 2 seconds, it's not going that far, right? So you're looking at 3, 4, 5 yards. So your passing plays essentially turn into running plays at that point in terms of yards per attempt. So after a while, you've ran, 7, 8, 9 of those, and at some point, you're running out of options, right? Unless you're able to pick on somebody like Warren Burrell, unless you're able to pick on somebody on the defense, like there's just a fantastic matchup. And even then, that will eventually be compromised because somebody else is going to roll over and say, look, can't handle this. Let's do a 2-on-1 over here. But the longer you are on the field, and these little dinks and dunks and things, they tried for some, big plays. They weren't there. But yeah, I thought he was really good at getting the ball out of his hands. And I'll give that Ball State quarterback. He's a senior, I think, a little more latitude. Like he knows his place. You're playing for Ball State. You don't have to do anything stupid. But again, it's a lot like the offense. There are good players. There's good units on the team. I think better than last year. But the playmaker on each side of the ball really hasn't emerged yet. I mean, you know what you're getting with Hendon. These guys that can consistently impact the game, make huge plays, they haven't emerged yet. But maybe they will. We shall see. All right, now some extracurriculars. So off the top, the announcing was atrocious. Atrocious. Tom Hart, is it Jesse Rogers, Cole Kublik? Look, I'm not a stick in the mud. I don't need my commentary to be completely buttoned down. I don't really prefer women commentators just due to the voice. That's maybe the old-fashioned in me, but it's just not. It doesn't sound good to the ears, people. It just doesn't sound good to the ears. But come on, what the hell is this? These guys aren't comedians. Like I remember reading an interview with Bill Maher years ago, and he said, his show gets real stupid sometimes because the comedians would come on and like try and be serious, like, they know anything about Yemen genocide or whatever. And then a goddamn senator would come on and then make stupid jokes. Like, what the hell? And I know it's hard to come up with material when the game is a blowout. Just do some research. Like, they talk for 5 minutes about ice cream sandwiches. Well, this new freshman quarterback was out handing the ball off. And it's like, then they joke about the lack of their concentration for a few minutes. Just awful. Normally, I like Kublik as sort of an analyst, but he told a story that it seemed to have gone on for at least 2.5 minutes. This was in between the ice cream sandwich talk. I don't know what that was about. I have zero idea. Like, I rewatched the game, and what is the point? If you're having trouble, finding things to talk about, maybe just talk about the game. Talk about what you see. Do some research. If you're expecting the game to be a blowout, there's going to be second-team guys. Talk about their recruitment. Talk about, he ran a 4.340. Okay, great. They did a little bit of that. But you know, you don't have to get laughing on us. You don't have to. It ain't got to be the goof troop or anything like that. So yeah, commentary is just awful. I'm sure we'll hear from them again. You know, the self-depreciating humor from Cole Kublik for, uh, the kids' autographs and shit. Just stop it. Talk about your personal life, not about ice cream sandwiches. You know, what's your wife doing? What's your wife up to? I love the flop. There was a flop there. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I went online to see if any Ball State fans were pissed off, and they were talking about like parking or whatever. So they didn't really care about that. But it's good to see the team having their dicks hang out a little bit. You know what I mean? You're playing a bad team, and this is the thing. One thing I love about this iteration, this Josh Heupel led Tennessee Vols squad this year, last year, when they're confronted with a team that is worse than them. So we faced Tennessee Martin this year, Akron, um, Ball State, the team we just played. Who else? Vanderbilt. They'll probably they had a rough game last week. Put up a lot of points, but I mean I think it was against a D2 squad. These are no-brainers. The, Josh Heupel understands if you have a team in front of you that's not good, put them away early. As simple as that. Knock their dick in the dirt. It's done. It's over. And you know, it's good to just look at a schedule and go, okay, well, we're better than that team. I mean, a lot of people would go, okay, were we better than South Carolina? It's like, yes, but it's an SEC team. You never really know. But with this, it's like, no, we're clearly better than this team, so that's pretty much it. And that's a good feeling. Um, the what else? Extracurriculars. Josh Heupel's doing well, I think, with the media. Um, I mean, he's really settled in to this spot. I think one good thing about being a head coach at a previous institution is you sort of understand the roles, the responsibilities. Unlike Jeremy Pruitt, who is learning on the job, trying to be a head coach and learning to navigate media and things like that. Um, it's just good to see him thrive. He seems like a good guy. So, but yeah, I think that's about it for today. So again, just some housekeeping notes. I'll do a podcast reviewing the previous week's game. I'll probably do one during a bye week as well, just talking about some random stuff. Members, if you remember, go to volpod.substack.com. You can get the preview edition of the podcast. That's where we get into maybe a little more numbers, a little more not just, hey, their defensive line's pretty good. No, I'll try my best to like break it down statistically in some arenas and things like that. There's a couple of statistics that I really enjoy that I think that affect a big part of the game. But if you don't want to become a member, you'll get this podcast every week. If you do become a member, you'll get the other podcast and plus some other writings and things like that on my Substack. You can catch me on YouTube, VolPod. I have a Twitter. I'll probably do something with it later. But other than that, thank you for listening, and go Vols.